The ominous whisper of the wind through the dense trees of Blackwood Forest sent shivers down John's spine. He knew he shouldn't have ventured this far off the beaten path, but his curiosity had driven him deeper into the heart of the ancient woods. The setting sun cast long, eerie shadows, and the woods grew darker with each step. Panic gnawed at his chest as he realized he was hopelessly lost. John fumbled for his phone, desperate for a signal, but the screen displayed only a mocking no-service message. He was truly alone in the heart of the forest, miles from civilization. The rustling leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl were the only sounds that broke the eerie silence. As darkness fell, John's sense of dread intensified. He stumbled through the underbrush trying to find any hint of a path or a road. The trees seemed to close in on him, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Then, he heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent a chill through his bones. He froze, his heart pounding, and strained his ears to locate the source of the sound. It was like no animal he'd ever heard before, a terrifying blend of rage and hunger. The growl drew closer, echoing through the trees. Panic consumed him as he realized that something was hunting him, stalking him through the darkened forest. He took off in the opposite direction, crashing through the underbrush, ignoring the branches that scratched at his face and tore at his clothes. John's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. He couldn't outrun whatever was behind him, but maybe he could find a place to hide. Just as that thought crossed his mind, he stumbled upon a decaying, moss-covered cabin, hidden among the trees. Desperation overcame his fear, and he pushed open the creaking door and slipped inside. The inside of the cabin was a decrepit mess with rotting furniture and a thick layer of dust covering everything. The air was musty and stale, and the only light came from the dim glow of the moon through cracked windows. John's heart pounded as he barricaded the door with a heavy wooden plank he found on the floor. He listened in terror as the growling drew nearer, the footsteps outside growing louder and closer. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever, but he needed time to think, to come up with a plan. His phone still had no signal and he was miles from help. Hours passed in the darkness of the cabin, the growling and footsteps continuing to haunt him. He could hear the creature circling the cabin, scratching at the walls and windows. John's mind raced with thoughts of what it could be. A bear? No, it was far too intelligent, too deliberate in its pursuit. Finally, as dawn approached, the growling faded, and the footsteps grew distant. John's hope soared, and he cautiously removed the barricade from the door. He had to get out of this cabin and find his way back to civilization. As he stepped outside, he gasped in horror. The forest was silent, but the ground was covered in a gruesome carpet of bones and tattered clothing. It was a chilling tableau of countless victims who had met their end in this cursed place. John realized that he had narrowly escaped the same fate, but he couldn't linger. He had to move quickly, find his way out of Blackwood Forest before whatever had been hunting him returned. He set off in a direction he hoped would lead him to safety, his every sense on high alert. Days passed, and John's ordeal in the forest took a heavy toll. He was exhausted, his clothes were torn and filthy, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. But he pushed on, driven by fear and determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, John stumbled upon a trail. It was overgrown and barely recognizable, but it was a path nonetheless. He followed it, his heart filled with a glimmer of hope. Hours later, he emerged from the forest, filthy, battered, and on the brink of collapse. He had survived the horrors of Blackwood Forest, but he knew he would never forget the growling, the stalking, the relentless pursuit. He knew that something ancient and malevolent dwelled in those woods, waiting for its next victim. As he stumbled back into civilization, he looked back at the dark expanse of trees, vowing never to return to Blackwood Forest. The memory of that terrible night would haunt him forever, a reminder that some horrors were best left undisturbed, lurking in the shadows of the ancient woods. In the heart of the dense, uncharted woods, Mark and Sarah pitched their tent beneath the ancient towering pines. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat from the cacophony of city life, a chance to rekindle their love amidst the whispering leaves and crackling campfire. The first day was a picturesque dream. The sun slanted through the trees, casting enchanting shadows, and the couple hiked along winding trails, hand in hand. They laughed, reminiscing about their early days together when life was simpler. As twilight painted the sky with hues of lavender, they returned to their campsite. Mark, the seasoned outdoorsman, ignited the fire, and its warm glow danced with their anticipation of the night. They roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and gazed up at the star-freckled heavens. But as the night grew deeper, a chilling wind crept through the trees, whispering secrets of the forest. Sarah clung to Mark, unease slowly inching into their hearts. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling like the leaves rustling in the darkness. Mark dismissed it as just the wilderness playing tricks on her mind, but Sarah couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was watching them from the impenetrable blackness beyond the fire's reach. They retreated into their tent, zipped up tight, hoping to shield themselves from the wilderness's spectral secrets. Then, an hour past midnight, it began. A low, guttural growl clawed its way through the air, vibrating the ground beneath them. Mark and Sarah froze in terror, clutching each other, their hearts pounding in sync with the primal rhythm of the forest. The growl drew nearer, morphing into an agonizing wail that sent shivers down their spines. It was a sound unlike anything they had ever heard, like the anguished cries of 1,000 tormented souls. With trembling hands, Mark unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shapes and shadows. And there it was, a grotesque silhouette, lurking in the dark. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that contorted and stretched like twisted tree branches. Its eyes glowed like twin embers, piercing the night with an otherworldly, malevolent gleam. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he took in the creature's grotesque, elongated fingers, each ending in a wicked claw-like talon. As the thing drew closer, its presence felt oppressive, like an evil aura that suffocated the very air around them. Mark and Sarah could barely breathe, let alone scream. The creature, an abomination of nature, moved with unnatural grace, its movements a macabre dance. It circled their tent, its eyes never leaving them, filled with a hunger that chilled their souls. Terrified, Mark and Sarah clung to each other, unable to tear their eyes away from the horror that had invaded their camping paradise. Time seemed to warp as the night wore on, the creature's relentless stalking never ceasing. Hours felt like eternity, and the couple's fear transformed into a desperate longing for the safety of dawn. They prayed for sunlight to pierce the nightmare that had become their reality. Finally, as the first glimmers of dawn painted the sky, the creature retreated into the woods, fading into the shadows from whence it came. Mark and Sarah waited, trembling, until they were certain it was gone. With the morning light came a sense of relief, but also a profound dread. They packed their things in haste, leaving behind the picturesque wilderness that had turned into a living nightmare. As they hiked back to civilization, the couple couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had taken something from them, something they could never fully reclaim. Their love for the great outdoors was forever tarnished, replaced by a haunting memory of the night they encountered the unknown. They never spoke of that dreadful night, not to each other, and not to anyone else. It remained a dark secret, buried deep within their souls, a reminder that sometimes, in the darkest corners of the world, there are horrors beyond imagination, waiting to shatter the peace of those who dare to venture into the unknown. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Robert had always considered himself an outdoorsman, but he'd never ventured this deep into the whispering pines. His curiosity had gotten the better of him, and now he found himself hopelessly lost. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches entwined in a sinister dance. Each step he took seemed to echo through the woods, as if the very earth itself was watching him. Panic settled in as he realized he had no cell signal. He was alone, and the forest was swallowing him whole. As twilight faded, Robert's fear grew. He had read about this forest, how it had a reputation for swallowing people whole. He thought it was just folklore, but the stories now seemed more real than ever. A rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. He turned, but the forest was silent again. He chided himself for his paranoia and continued forward. It was then that he heard it, a guttural growl, low and menacing. He spun around to see nothing but the dense trees. The growl grew louder, closer. Fear constricted his chest as he realized something was stalking him. He broke into a run, branches and thorns clawing at his clothes and face. The growl pursued him, a relentless predator in pursuit of its prey. Hours passed, but the growling never ceased. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, and Robert was its quarry. He had no choice but to keep moving, to find some way out of this nightmare. But there were no paths, no signs of civilization, only the relentless growling, which now seemed to be coming from all directions. Exhaustion forced him to stop. He crouched behind a tree, gasping for breath. His mind raced, searching for a way out. It was then he heard a soft whisper, like the breeze through the leaves. Robert. His heart froze. Who could possibly know his name out here? He peered around the tree, his eyes darting through the darkness. No one was there, just the oppressive, unending forest. Robert, come closer. The voice was female, gentle and soothing. Against his better judgment, he moved towards it. The growling had ceased, replaced by the siren call of the voice. As he followed the voice deeper into the forest, he stumbled upon a clearing. Moonlight streamed down, revealing a figure standing there, her back turned to him. She was draped in a tattered, ethereal gown, her long black hair flowing like a river of shadows. "Who are you?" Robert asked, his voice trembling. The figure turned to face him, and he recoiled in horror. Her face was a grotesque mask, her eyes empty sockets, and her flesh mottled and decayed. "I am the guardian of the Whispering Pines," she whispered, her voice like a dying breath. "And you, Robert, are my latest guest." Before he could react, skeletal hands reached out, grabbing him. The forest came alive, the trees shifting and stretching, their branches transforming into gnarled limbs that bound him tightly. As the guardian drew closer, he realized the growling had returned, louder and more sinister than ever. It came from the trees themselves, from the very ground beneath him. The forest was alive, a malevolent force that had lured him in, and now it hungered for his soul. The guardian leaned closer, her hollow sockets boring into his soul. "You will become one with the Whispering Pines, Robert. Your fear, your despair, your very essence will nourish this forest for eternity." Desperation clawed at Robert's heart as he struggled against his bindings, but they held him fast. He couldn't escape. He was trapped, a helpless victim of the forest's insatiable hunger. As the guardian's bony fingers reached for his face, a blinding light erupted from the heavens. A chorus of ethereal voices filled the clearing, and the guardian screeched in agony as the light consumed her. The trees withered and retreated, releasing their hold on Robert. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath, as the forest around him convulsed and groaned. The guardian's screams echoed through the woods, and then, in an instant, everything fell silent. When Robert finally mustered the courage to stand, he found himself alone in the clearing. The forest seemed different now, as if it had lost its malevolent spirit. He stumbled out of the Whispering Pines, his body battered and his mind scarred by the horrors he had witnessed. As he emerged into the safety of the outside world, he knew he would carry the memory of that night with him forever. The Whispering Pines were no ordinary forest. They were a realm of darkness, a place where something ancient and evil dwelled, something that hungered for the souls of those foolish enough to venture into its depths. Robert had escaped, but he knew he was one of the lucky few. Most who entered the Whispering Pines were never seen again, lost to the insatiable hunger of the forest and its guardian. And as he looked back at the dark expanse of trees, he vowed never to return to that cursed place. For he knew that some horrors were best left undisturbed, hidden in the depths of the whispering pines.